Do we need to waste any more time though, Mike?
I don't think so. I think it's time to get into pretty much the news of the start of the year. And it always
Yeah.
seems to be Microsoft, doesn't it?
Seems like that, huh? Last year. So I'm thinking, I always think back. Like, I feel like this year I'm going to be thinking back to this episode number last year. Because this episode number last year was our biggest story of 2022.
Yeah,
And that
the
was
Activision Blizzard
the Activision
purchase.
Blizzard acquisition. A year later, a lot of that's progressed. Obviously, some things, haven't turned out as we planned, but that's fine. But one thing I will say is that, unfortunately, this piece of news is a little bit of a downer compared to what Microsoft had to offer us last year in
It
January.
is.
And that is Microsoft's going to be laying off 10,000 workers amid the tech downturn. Pulled this article from Max Zahn over at ABC News. Yeah, this is ABC News, by the way. Like, this is like, the main like non-gaming distributions are picking up on this because it is pretty crazy. Um, Microsoft said that it would lay off 10,000 employees this year, the latest tech firm to slash jobs as the sector contracts after a pandemic era boom. Layoffs will affect nearly 5% of Microsoft's global workforce, the company said, which is kind of crazy to think about. 10,000 people get laid off, and that's only 5% of their workforce. Like, gosh,
It's a massive company, dude.
yeah,
It's so big.
it really is, man. So, as we saw customers accelerate their digital spend during the pandemic, we've now seeing them optimize their digital spend to do more with less. That's what the CEO said in a statement to employees. We're also seeing organizations in every industry and geography exercise caution as some parts of the world are in a recession and other parts are anticipating one. Company said the job cuts changes to its hardware portfolio and the consolidation of its real estate holdings would result in a $1.2 billion charge. Um, Tech industry downturn marked by a 33% drop in the Nasdaq last year has brought job cuts across the sector, including large firms like Amazon and Facebook parent Meta. Layoffs at Microsoft arrived in response to the macroeconomic conditions and changing customer priorities. Companies said in a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Um, Dude, like, this is just crazy. Like, I want to stop there for a second because this, like, Microsoft laying off people. Granted, this is the biggest one we've heard in the last like year or two, but there were a couple of layoffs last year that Microsoft did, particularly to
Yeah,
their Xbox sector, and their Edge like sector. They laid off. It wasn't nearly, I think it wasn't nearly as much. It was still a lot though. It was like, 1,000, 1,500, 1,800, something like that.
right.
But I think it was like 1,800 or something in July, and then like 1,000 in November. But there was a couple layoffs, last year that happened. But then it's like the start of the new year. It's all of a sudden it's like 10,000 people are just getting laid off like that. Um, and if you put in, I guess, the economic perspective on all this, and um, yeah, it's very it's very, like, I guess, both somewhat expected, but also like, whoa, like, we're finally kind of seeing like the end of like the pandemic era. I think in like economic terms, anyway. And we're like Microsoft said, starting to see people kind of level out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, but there's more to the story than just like, okay, here's 10,000 workers getting laid off. It was mainly in part, I guess, the devil is in the details with this one, in the sense of like, okay, where in the company are these layoffs happening? And a lot of these layoffs were actually like in the Xbox sector, like, Xbox,
Yeah.
and some even like specific developers, like I think like Bethesda and 343, I think were like huge major ones. It was like, okay, like, these are actually getting hit harder than we originally expected with these layoffs. And so it is affecting gaming to a certain extent. But yeah, it's definitely kind of odd, and kind of like, I mean, it's kind of crazy too. I mean, we see, if you're on Twitter or anything like that, and we were like, specifically in the 343 community, in the Halo community, like, you and I are pretty like plugged in, I feel like, for the most part, and it's like we see all these devs, like, the trend, like, Twitter
Yeah.
trends just send me their tweets of like, oh, by the way, this was my last day at 343, and this is like, earlier this week. And it's like, these vets that are leaving, and these like names that have been around for years at the company. It's not just necessarily contractors, although there is speculation that, a chunk of these layoffs are probably just contractors that were close to expiration anyway, and that were probably out the door soon. So But yeah, I mean, it's still crazy. I mean, to see stuff like that, and I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion, Mike, on all this because I think it's I mean, layoffs are never fun, but there seems to be a little more to the story with this one.
Yeah, I think the tech industry in general, like especially the small startup companies, they're all laying off like mad over the last couple of months because like the economic downturn of higher interest rates and just slower economy, slower amount of money, purchasing power, and all this other stuff that's going on in the worldwide market. It only makes sense that a large amount of companies are going to be downsizing, regardless of their size overall. So for Microsoft, I was telling you about it, right? Like when this news broke this morning, I wasn't that surprised because this is something Microsoft has always done. It's like in really good economic situations, they always overhire and they're always trying to like expand and do new things and take risks. But then when the economy like slows down and the investments go away or like interest rates are going higher and all this other stuff where it doesn't make sense for them to take that type of risk anymore, they'll just start laying off entire divisions, like R&D departments kind of thing.
Yeah,
So going to what you were saying with like HCS and like 343 laying off, I think the number I saw most recently is rumored to be 130. I don't think their studio is over like 500,
yeah.
right?
I feel like it can't be.
So that's a lot, man. That's like 20+%
That's a pretty big
of an
chunk.
entire studio.
Uh,
And there's some like content creators who have gone out to the studio in Seattle and they're saying like entire divisions working on campaign, like the art division, are gone. Like they were supposed to do a campaign DLC soon, and
yeah,
it's probably not going to happen.
yeah. But yeah, either
So
that or most of the work is somehow done already, and it's just a few left to get it over the finish line, kind of thing.
yeah, you know something that's kind of odd too is I've seen a lot of people, not odd, that's not the word, but I've seen a lot of people make comments about how the Microsoft Activision Blizzard went last year for around $70 billion. I feel like we raise it every time. Wasn't it like 68?
It was like yeah, 68.9 or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, something like that. So we'll round up just to say 70 billion, even though 2 billion's a lot. But they're saying like you got you got the CEO giving himself something like a $52 million bonus last year. You have the purchase of Activision Blizzard going for 70 billion. It's like the 70 billion is like a promise that they're trying to upkeep, but it's blocked by regulations. And that happened last year in a completely different economy, right? So I don't think it's
yeah,
fair to say. Whereas the 52 million bonus or whatever rumor number that is, and then 3 weeks later you're laying people off, you're not making the decision to lay somebody off, at least that many people, in, like, a short amount of time. So that's, like, pre-planned, you know?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely some thought involved with it. Um, yeah, I mean, you don't just lay off 10,000 people on a whim, kind of thing.
No.
But yeah, I mean, this is because the article also says Amazon's in a similar boat. They resumed a months long wave of cuts that ultimately slashed 18,000 jobs at Amazon. So it's like a
Yeah.
couple of companies are experiencing this. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think yeah, I mean, I think to your point too, like it's definitely clear that Microsoft, yeah, probably sometimes, I mean, it's got to be a thing of they're just they're over hiring or they're hiring because money's good right now, but it's like when it all comes down to it, especially when there's when there's like economic uncertainty, it's kind of just like it gets to a point where they're just like, all right, we
Yeah.
need to start cutting corners or doing something, or like what's not as critical kind of thing. Um, and yeah, it's probably just the name of the game, but it's ultimately unfortunate because there's a lot of people that are gonna have to be looking for other work, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's a lot of people,
that's
man.
true. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that are gonna be looking for work, but I figure if you're working for Microsoft, you're probably really qualified for most positions. It's just like
Yeah,
if Microsoft is laying people off and that's like a major market mover in basically the economy, the stocks, but also just innovation and everyday use. It's not really a good sight that Microsoft's laying people off. It's like, well, what's a smaller company gonna do?
yeah,
You know,
yeah, it's true.
people might just follow suit just because it's like, well, Microsoft did it. I mean, they see something we don't.
Yeah,
Next thing you know, just like cut corners, cut people out.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's a good
man,
point.
it's
It's kind of like yeah,
pretty
I mean,
wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's we're definitely gonna see companies that take example. I think I think too, but like yeah, to your point, I mean, if you're hired at Microsoft, you're good at what you do, if not extraordinary at what you do. So
Yeah.
and there's a reason you get hired at a big corporation like that. So um, I have no sense, at least a decent amount of people will probably land on their feet pretty shortly. Won't take that long, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
still wild.
Yeah. We hope so, like for sure. But in the scope of things, like 10,000 employees, that's a lot of people individually. But then when you look at the overall percentage of their workforce of 221,000, like for the state and the health of Microsoft as a company, it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah,
But for the amount of when you think 10,000 employees, that's like 10,000 families potentially.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Definitely in the broader, like, macroeconomic, like, standpoint, if that's even the right term, like, it's not too much, but, like
yeah,
but, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's only a few companies in the world that can lay off 10,000 people and it'd be, like, a drop in the pond, you know? It's like, it's
yeah,
just
that's a
just not
fact.
that
Yeah,
many, so,
yeah,
um,
and you know all their names, kind of thing.
yeah, I mean,
Not the people, but the companies.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, who knows how many of, like, it makes you wonder too, and, like, just how many people, like how many of those 10,000 people knew each other and like how big the networks were of like, of job circles. So,
True. True. Hopefully, it's not entire job circles where like an entire group of people can't get hired because a lot of hiring nowadays, like this is a pretty big problem. If you don't have the right resume that says the right keywords in the search engine, then you can just get like thrown into the bin real quick,
yeah.
thrown away. So it like connections and networking probably mean more now than they ever have.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, I mean networking's everything. Connecting with people is everything, I think. Especially in the tech industry and even
yeah,
more so in the gaming industry, right? Like unless you I mean like don't get me wrong, you can really put in work and just like put your head down and really get stuff done and like kind of
oh, yeah,
shoehorn your way in. But it's a lot of work. And there's people that, get to that get to those industries a lot quicker if they just, talk to the right people. So just a way of life, I guess.
yeah. I think they'll be all right. I think people that work at Microsoft, usually computer programmers, anything tech related, you're basically like a skilled trade job.
Yeah.
Like you have to be
Yeah.
highly skilled and like you're always learning kind of thing. So those people are always going to be valuable.
Yeah. Definitely.
We'll see. We'll see how this affects. I was thinking about this too. It's like, how is this going to affect? Like, when did they make this decision? Why did they make this decision? And how is that going to affect what's going on in the EU about the approval of the acquisition? Like, if they're going to make the acquisition, they have to pay the 68 billion, right?
Yeah.
So then
I
they
would
might need
think.
to like start cutting costs, which are like eliminating certain positions, right? Because you're going to be bringing on an entire new company, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this could be a sign that they think they're going to be approved. You
Yeah, I
know,
mean it's possible. Yeah, I
who
mean it's one of
knows?
those things too. I mean, yeah, when you're merging together like two companies like that, it's certainly a lot and it gets to a point of, I think to your point of at a certain point it's like, how many of these people do we really need between the two companies and like, is there any like is there any like, cross training or like any anything that'd be
Any
necessary?
like yeah, like what's it called when they do acquisitions or like they're combining merges? You have like positions that are doing the same thing but for two different companies, and you only really need one person to do it at one company when they become a merge.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
forgot. There's like a term for that. It's like doubling up the position or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know. I think that's a good point. I didn't think about that though, of like, what's gonna come of if the acquisition does go through, like what are we gonna see in terms of, Microsoft's like Microsoft's employee, count and stuff like that. Like how many people
Yeah.
actually stay versus how many people end up having to leave. Like it's something I didn't think about, but it's a good point. I'm really curious what it's gonna look like. So
Yeah. I think one more thing to mention before we move on to the next article is how the tech industry is down 33% from last year on the NASDAQ. I
yeah.
had no idea it was that far down. But I feel like if you're at an all-time high, right? And the interest rates go up and the economy's freaking out because does nobody knows what's happening. I mean, it's gonna go down. I feel like all
Yeah.
industries are going down right now.
Yeah.
Crypto's like 80,000% down.
Yeah. I think it's
So,
just kind of name of the game thing. Like, you're gonna have your
yeah.
peaks and your valleys, and this is just a valley right now. That's all it is. I think I suspect, it who knows? It may rebound to, where it was, and if not, it'll come pretty close, I think. So definitely weird times though, no doubt.